We have tumultuous times right now with war and many other things on the table, and I'm glad to have a guest with me today, Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're going to be talking about many different things to do with different citizenships, where you might possibly want to move. And I just want to say that I'm happy to announce that I will be speaking at Andrew's event, which is in Kuala Lumpur later this year. So definitely check that out, and there'll be a link in the description of this video. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Well, it's my pleasure. And we're both in these very transient spaces with bad lighting and like some weird, like sheep. I don't know who the hell picked out this lamp, but we're going to have to really bring it today for people.
Yes, at least we're on the same time zone though, because
Yes.
you travel around. So, and as do I, and we just so happen to be on the same time zone doing this, which is fantastic.
I
So,
can't tell you how many times, speaking of the event in Kuala Lumpur, and by the way, it's called Nomad Capitalist Live, not to hijack your show. I can't tell you how many times I've been in Kuala Lumpur just living there because I've got a home there, and I'm on some show in Austin, Texas, and the guy only records at 3:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. It's like, well, that's like bloody 4:30 a.m. or something. Like, that's when I do it. So
yeah.
it's good that we could be in the same place.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, so I actually asked my audience if they had any questions for you, and they came up with some good ones. It'll be funny. I think they're quite loaded questions because I'm not even sure if there is an answer. So I'll start off with
Yeah.
the most popular one, which is, what do you think, if there is any, is the best country to live in the world right now, or best countries to live in the world?
Well, just to take a step back, I mean, my philosophy is go where you're treated best. My father said those 5 magic words when I was 12 years old, and I've applied them for much of my adult life. So the very nature of what I do is you choose from the buffet. You don't rely on one friend to fulfill all your needs. You have different
Hmm.
friends. You have the one friend you go to the pub with, and that's kind of what you do. You have the one friend that you go, sailing with. You have the friend that you go intellectual stuff, museums, whatever. I look at countries the same way. So I think, for me, in my perspective, the best transactional banking without a lot of fluff is Singapore. Could you live in Singapore? Sure. Is it needlessly expensive? Are there more rules than I would like? Is it a place where real estate is extraordinarily expensive for foreigners? Yeah. And so I just don't think Singapore is the best. I have stuff all around the world, from where my websites are hosted to where my money is, to where my asset protection structures are, to where my company is incorporated. None of those are where I live. And the places where I do live are perfectly fine with that. Much more so than where I'm originally from in the United States. So, I mean, where do I maintain homes? I'm in Ireland now. I've been checking out Ireland. It's maybe not the best kept secret. I've spent some time. I think it's maybe a manageable place in Western Europe that has fewer of the problems of many of the Western countries, and it's just more pleasant. So for someone who wants a soft landing to an English-speaking country, that could work. I've lived the longest, actually, where Nomad Capitalist Live is going to be in Kuala Lumpur. I've been there as a part-time resident for about 11 years. I love it there. I think it's a tremendous amount of what I call soft freedom, very tax friendly, friendly people. I was just in Colombia where I have a small home. I like that. Although if you don't speak Spanish, it's a little bit harder. It feels a little lonely after a while. If you're not, I can speak some, but I'm not perfectly fluent to like get into complex conversations. And then, for people who, and I've had some members of my team who've come on from places like the UK and Ireland, where they go out to where we have people in Serbia or Georgia, and they're like, hey, this is just total freedom. Particularly in Georgia, very warm people, very hospitable people. Serbia is more like leave me the hell alone kind of vibes. So, I mean, those are places where I own property, where I've spent time. I like some better than others, but I think, I can prognosticate about all the other places, but I like places that are off the beaten track. I like places within those countries that are not as popular. So I'm not in Medellin, where a lot of the nomads are. I'm in Bogota, in Colombia. I'm in Kuala Lumpur, I think is the best city in Malaysia, but I'm not in Bangkok next door in Thailand. I'm in Kuala Lumpur. I like to go to places that are a bit underrated, that are a bit off the radar. I don't want to be overrun with foreigners who have different interests than I do. And so that's where I live. And I guess that's the best indication of what I think is the best. But, it could change on a dime, and that could change tomorrow. So that's why I think you want to have more than one.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really smart because because like everything is changing constantly. It's a fluid situation. I mean, we know in Canada, for instance, that things have gone really downhill over the past 5 to 6 years. You know, in 20 years, hopefully, maybe things are going to be better. So things are changing all the time. And I think it's important to be in a place. I know a lot of people, they want to just be set on one country specifically, but the way I've kind of opened my mind up to it is kind of similar to your philosophy, where it's like you have to be open to other places and you can't just say, oh, I'm going to live here for the rest of my life and that's it, because you know residency rules could change, all kinds of things, crime, you don't know. So it's
You
an
want to be a little
interesting.
polyamorous. The nomad and nomad capitalist. I mean, I have been, and I am to a lesser extent now, nomadic. I move between different bases. I created what's called the trifecta method, where you spend 4 months in 3 different places, depending on what they are. They could be tax friendly. It's also just a place to see different places, opportunity, culture, food, all of that. But if you want to live in one place, it's fine. But the nomad really means kind of like the nomads on the Mongolian steppe. When your source of food, when your source of sustenance goes away, you got to move on to the next spot. And I think that, we have one of the guys speaking this year at the event. His parents moved to Australia from Sri Lanka. And normally
Mhm.
immigrants or children of immigrants have a very hard time moving. He didn't. He moved to the UAE. That's the place where he thinks is the best. We disagree a little bit on that, but that's the best for him. This idea that, hey, maybe Australia was good for 30 years. Australia has done a lot of nasty things recently. And I mean, on
Yeah.
the tax front, on the personal freedom front, like it is. I don't understand who's going to Australia. We have a lot of people move out of Australia as clients. I say to myself, even if you're going to stay in one place, be open to what's the next place. Yeah, people like this sense of certainty, but look at it this way. Look at your relationships, right? I had a friendship of about 10 years. I've had friendships, probably my oldest friendship at this point is that I talked to. The person is 18 years old or so. I had a friend that I'd known for 9 or 10 years, and we just kind of drifted apart. I don't look at that as the person's a bad person. I don't look at that as something went wrong. I just realized, they were going in a different direction. I wanted to be a bit more positive. They were kind of struggling with some stuff. They didn't want my help. And so do I look at that and say, well, hey, if I can't make a friend and this friend's not going to be my friend until the rest of my dying days, like I'm not going to make the friend. No, like you enjoy it for what it is. You celebrate that and then you move on. And people have this very hard time moving on. And they come up with all kinds of good sounding excuses, like I'm running from something. Yes, when I was 25 years old. Yes, running to all the the beautiful women of all the countries, and I had some great relationships, like running to learning how the world is evolving in places like Asia. They come up with all these little stories about how if you can't plan out the rest of their lives with 1,000% certainty, and I'm like, yeah, that's not how it's supposed to work. Like somehow there's something wrong with go where you're treated best. It's like, no, go where you're treated best is competition and action. You do it for like buying chicken wings, but you don't do it for where the country you give half your money to. It's very odd to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, it is bizarre. And I think a lot of people now in Canada and America too, there's a lot of people retiring. So I think because they're retiring as well, like the idea of traveling around is kind of difficult for them, but they
Yeah.
still want to go somewhere where they're treated best. And basically, most of those people, from what I hear, and there is a lot of people, I get comments and messages all the time from people who are leaving Canada and the United States. And most of them tend to gravitate towards like the Americas, but they
Yep.
never look at like Asia. I'm looking forward to going to Kuala Lumpur because I've heard so many great things about it. It's affordable, they speak English, the services are really good. It's
Yep.
as close to a first world country as you're gonna get in like one of these kind of offshore tax haven type places. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.
It's a real country.
Yes.
It's not like an island of 20,000 people and you go stir crazy.
Hmm.
But no, I think, and listen, I'm saying this with empathy because obviously what I help people do is figure this stuff out. I shepherd them from point A to point B, and not for the event necessarily, but for our clientele. I think people are scared. And it's the first generation now of people where, look at the Wall Street Journal. I mean, going to Ecuador to retire is becoming a thing. And for some of those people,
Yeah.
it's kind of out of necessity.
Yes, I
You see
agree.
best rated places are Ecuador and Mexico and Panama, and people are moving there because it's cheaper because they're only living on Social Security. The same way you have people who are in our generation in the U.S. now who they're struggling. Now we can argue if they should be doing more or not. I don't live there to know, but I just feel like a lot of people in the Western world now are struggling. And I have to think it's partially because of what Steve Bannon, the Trump advisor, said. We hollowed out the middle class in the United States and we built one in Asia. As a person who has spent much of my life for the last dozen years in Asia, and as a person who's seen the beautiful people in Malaysia and other countries around there and invests in Cambodia and Indonesia, I'm happy there's a middle class in Asia now. I'm happy there's a very nascent middle class in Africa. We're going to be talking about hotspots in both those places you can invest in at the event. But I'm happy that those people have an opportunity now. Am I happy that that's perhaps part of the reason why it has come at the expense of the average person who used to have it pretty easy in the U.S., got a high school degree, got a job, bought a 5-bedroom house with 3 cars, life was good. Yeah, I don't think that just because you're born in the United States, you should have it so much better at the expense of people all around the world. I think there's opportunity. Yeah. We have clients who are from Vietnam who have $100 million, self-made, from a village in Vietnam. Nobody gave them anything. So if they can do it, sorry. I don't really feel sorry for the guy in Alberta. I've made most of my wealth outside of the United States at this point. So I think people are afraid where they see what's happening and it's scary and they feel like I want to live here. That's true of all human beings. But I just think we have to get over that fear and we have to accept things as they are. And the United States and Canada and I suppose the UK are not what they once were. And you can sit around and fight and pound your fists and say, this isn't right. Listen, I'm nobody. You're nobody. Nobody's anybody. One person, nobody cares about you, especially in a country like the United States. You're a pawn.
Yeah.
Go to a country with 1 million people and maybe then you'll have some kind of say. You live in the US, you don't matter. Yeah. I didn't matter. Just go where you're treated best.
Yeah, that's very true. And you renounced your U.S. citizenship, correct?
I did, yeah, about almost 6.5 years ago. Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah. So and that's another fear. Like you don't hear that so many times. People renouncing their citizenship.
There's thousands of people every year. There's new records being set quite frequently, and we don't even, I don't think, know the full accurate statistics. I don't think the government wants to put those all out. And it's just, I think it's notoriously somewhat riddled with errors, the list they put out. But thousands of people renounce their citizenship every year now, up from hundreds not so long ago. It's people generally like myself who had lived overseas for a substantial period of time. I didn't even want to go to the U.S. And you know what made me realize? There was no particular thing that said I'm going to renounce U.S. citizenship. I had thought for years about doing it. I don't really agree with a lot of the stuff the country does. I didn't feel proud to be an American. I actually felt kind of embarrassed when you'd go somewhere and here's my American passport and people lump you in. Sometimes people just hear my accent and they lump me in and think I'm some, NATO bombing, nasty guy. I had that happen. I hosted a party in Vienna and some women gave out to me that because of my accent, I have no business commenting on U.S. politics. I gave up one of the best passports in the world in protest. But what I realized was I didn't even want to go to the United States. I didn't even want to have a layover. If I went from Mexico to somewhere in Europe, I would avoid even flying through the U.S. just to avoid dealing with them. And yet, I still had all the requirements of being a U.S. citizen, which are some of the most onerous in the world. And that's one thing. But the bigger thing for me was that the average citizen that would watch a video and comment or that you just interview in the street would say, yeah, that's damn right. He was born here. He has to pay. Well, I thought citizenship was a benefit that you were part of the tribe and you benefited from what the tribe is doing. And if you weren't using the tribe's resources, then you have to pay. And they just kind of, okay, you're living over there now. But no, what's happened is people have increasingly become angry, which I think anger is a response to powerlessness. People feel powerless. Their lives have changed in the West. Life isn't so easy anymore. So they're angry. And their anger is directed at me because I don't want to live in their country. And it wasn't that I left to avoid taxes. That wasn't the very first thing that motivated me when I was 15 years old when I moved overseas. I didn't really know that much about taxes when I was 15. I believed in low taxes, but I didn't know what it was like to pay. I hadn't felt it yet, right? The fact that the culture is so angry now that's that guy, even though he never even flies through our country, should pay because he was born here, even though his money's all made overseas. I said, that's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse as the momentum of these countries goes the wrong direction. Everything has momentum. The West, mostly has negative momentum. You don't stop a country of 330 million people moving very quickly in the wrong direction very quickly. It doesn't stop fast. It takes a long time to turn that around. It's like an alcoholic. It has to hit rock bottom, and then maybe it'll turn around. And I
Yeah.
just said, I don't have how many years to endure this abusive relationship, wondering how much more abusive it will get. I'm going to give up my passport and make sure that I'm covered. And listen, since I've given it up, I mean, you've seen they've even stopped people from renouncing during the pandemic, even while
Oh, wow.
the embassies were open for other services, but they wouldn't do renunciations. So I mean, you can't even do it. I mean, that's pretty sick.
Yeah, that's becoming almost very authoritarian. And that's what I see in the West, unfortunately, a lot is a lot of the countries now are becoming very authoritarian. And even, people will argue left, right, and between two different parties. And the way
Yeah.
I really see it is they're all cut from the same cloth and pushing similar agendas. So it's hard to really, I mean, like Republicans and Democrats, people are so divisive on both sides, but you get either one in and maybe it's slightly better, but it's mostly the same agenda and policies that are pushed. And, people will agree with authoritarian right policies, but then as
Yeah.
soon as it's authoritarian left, they're like, no, no, no. So you can't have it both ways, I feel.
I've told this story before. When I first decided, yes, I'm going forward, I'm starting Nomad Capitalist. It was at first just kind of a blog, just me traveling and writing. And eventually people came and asked me for advice.
Yeah.
I was in Turkey and I was sitting next to a guy going from wherever to wherever in Turkey. And he worked, I think, for the UN. I forget kind of the story as the years go by, but I think he worked for the UN and he was telling me how they get policy achieved. And he seemed like a left-wing kind of guy. And he's like, I'm like, why don't you just tell people, and this is my naivete, and I still operate like this in my business with my employees and people in my life. Like, I just pretty much tell people what I think and people know that I'm going to be authentic. And I'm like, why don't you just tell people the end result? He's like, no, 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 because people will swallow incremental change, but they won't swallow. Like if you just say like, hey, let's get to like this, let's have a wealth tax. They're like, that seems scary. But if you kind of, take small steps to get there, eventually they'll swallow it.
Yeah.
And that was scary. But listen, look at what Trump just said not too long ago about this abortion fight. And I'm sure somebody will be upset with me for saying this. But for years, Republicans in the United States said, okay, listen, overturn Roe v. Wade, no more U.S.-wide, right to abortion. Throw it back to the states. We're states' rights people. I was watching debates back that same year when Obama got reelected, 2012. States' rights, states' rights, states' rights, says the Republicans. Now they got Roe v. Wade overturned, which I think has led, some people to want to leave the U.S. from the left wing, saying, I mean, this is not advanced. And now what am I seeing? Now the Republicans are like, oh, it's not a states' rights issue. Let's ban it nationwide. And it's like, wait a second. Your political tactics are no better than the other side's. I'm more right wing, I suppose, particularly economically, but I was never in lockstep with the American right wing by any means. And people find that's another reason people find me very confusing. If you don't agree with every single thing Trump's ever said, you're like, you have Trump derangement syndrome. But on that, it just kind of once again showed me the true colors of each party, and the party that maybe I'm a little bit more inclined to agree with, just partially because economic issues are important to me. It's like, oh, you guys have been saying something for decades, and now that you finally got it, you're doing exactly what the guy from the UN does, and you're just kind of like spoon feeding people stuff that they want to hear, and you're being disingenuous. If you think that system is going to help you go where you're treated best or be where you're treated best, you're crazy, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I moved from the UK to Canada, and part of the reason why I moved from the UK to Canada was to better my life. But the thing that I've realized over like the 8 or 9 years that we've been in Canada now is like things go downhill, and you look back at what it was like when you came and you think, wow, this is totally different. And I also look at my home country, the UK, which I only visit once a year. And because you're out of that country most of the time, you go back and you notice how things are getting progressively worse, like you say. Where you're actually there, it's very hard to actually see it because it's all happening so gradually, like you said. So all these policies and different things that are being put in. I mean, even in Canada now, there's censorship things that are being pushed through, and people seem to think that if we just elect this guy, he's gonna just get rid of all this stuff because he might agree with it in some ways because he can use it to further his agenda as well. So I think it's sort of a weird situation that we're in, because it's almost like a wealth transfer from the Western countries that have always held the wealth to other countries like Asia, where a lot of the wealth has gone since 2008. And part of my story was like I was an engineer back in the UK, and the company I worked for made healthcare products, and that company that went to China, and this was after 2008 and everything like that happened. But many companies were going to China at that point, and the UK used to be a big manufacturing country and make most of the world's
Yeah, we
products
did.
at one point.
You know what? I had a friend of mine, one of those long running friends from a previous business. He said, you know what your superpower is you don't get nostalgic. Now, I do a
Yeah.
little bit. I remember I made a video about a year ago on our YouTube channel where I said one of the big legacy radio stations, KDWN in Las Vegas, big booming. You could hear it all over. You could hear it in Canada at night in the winter. This station was a big station broadcasting all over the Western North America. And eventually the tower site, which at the time was in the middle of nowhere when I was a kid, Art Bell was on this station. I mean, just legacy, great historic radio station. But Las Vegas grew so much to where this middle of nowhere tower site became quite somewhere. And they tore the tower down and they handed in the radio station license, I think, to build an Amazon warehouse because they could get tens of millions of dollars for the land. And what's an AM radio station worth? I mean, so, the world changes. And that was a little sad to me, but like, what am I going to do about it? I was in the radio business at one point and I did relatively well for myself, not as well as I have done in this business by far, but I enjoyed it. I could have tilted at windmills and just said, I'm going to stay in the radio business for the rest of my life because I really hope it works. I mean, hope doesn't get you anywhere. I think a lot of people are hoping. And as an entrepreneur my entire life, even, ever since I was 12 years old, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I realized no one's going to do it except you. And I look at everybody who, on YouTube is relying on collabs, or everybody who's relying on referral partners in their business. I mean, I like to rely on myself and I like to rely on my team. You can't rely on anybody else if you're going to win. But somehow, again, we throw that out when it comes to politicians. Even some pretty entrepreneurial minded people are like, well, if we only put, Vivek in, like all of our problems will be solved. It's like, how many times have we said that? How many times can we say this is the most important election of our lifetime? I mean, it's a bloody circus. You're responsible for your success. You're responsible for your, and I've learned this one the hard way, this one's important, your happiness. Like, stop delegating the most important parts of your life to some politician. And I don't care if they're on your side or not, they're still a politician.
No, I totally agree with you there. It is ridiculous in my opinion. And I think a lot of people who actually leave that I've spoke to as well, it's kind of funny how immediately after they leave, like they'll still look at what goes on, but most of them immediately say they're both the same. Like they come to the realization, almost having that epiphany of, oh, it's all the same when you actually think about it. But when you're there, I think it is hope, which is just a 4-letter word, nothing more, that people are trying to cling on to something desperately where they really need to just figure out, and I've said it to people many times, to look to leave. The only way that you're going to actually do something is by boycotting the country that you're in. You're not going to change anything. It's like you said, like we have so little power, and our only supposed power is to vote, but that's really more of a virtue signaling thing nowadays anyway. So I think it's better to just go where you're treated best, and think that now with online working, it's much easier to do. And I get people say to me all the time, well, what am I going to do? And it's like, what are your skill set? Build it around what your skill set is or what you love and enjoy doing.
That was always a very hard part for me to understand. I can be empathetic about a lot of things. I was always building stuff since I was 10 years old, writing a magazine and selling it door to door. I mean, to me, finding ways to make money and just executing are pretty straightforward. I stopped filling. You ever get those surveys? Like I fly a lot, so I get like, how did Qatar Airways do? I just delete them all. Why? Because I realized Qatar Airways doesn't care whether I was happy or not. Like my opinions are like, if somebody, a small business, if Tina from All States Mailing in San Diego, I've known for 15 years, calls and says, hey, what do you think we can improve? I like Tina, and I'm going to tell Tina what, probably not much, but hey, I'm going to give her my feedback because I think it will be implemented. Qatar Airways doesn't care, and your government doesn't care. And I just think like when I renounced citizenship, I had to get to the point, and I knew I was ready. And I talked to some of my friends who I had pontificated about renouncing with years earlier. And they said, I think you're much more content now And here's why. There's not any element of revenge in this for you. Now, I have a business. In my business, I mean, it's a very diversified business now, but we still have a decent plurality of North Americans who are our clientele and our guests at Nomad Capitalist Live. And so I'll talk about the challenges in the United States as a showman, and I believe everything I say. But I realized it was the time to renounce when I no longer wanted to like show them, like, I'm going to show you, like people want to hurt themselves because they think like everyone else will finally see, how much they're missing or something. And obviously that's a very sad thing as well. But like the U.S. government doesn't care if you renounce. No citizen cares. The people who go on YouTube and say, if you don't like it so much, leave. And you're like, yeah, I'm 12 years ahead of you. They're not going to be like, well, then by all means, I'm so sorry. I got it wrong. No, then they'll have the exact opposite. How dare you leave? You're a scumbag. It's like, yeah. You just told me to leave if I don't like it. No. Like, you're not, like, you have to do it for yourself. And that's selfish. No, that's self-preservation. It's your job to look out for you. It's not anyone else's job to look out for you. And if you think the politicians are looking out for you, again, I think you're nuts.
Yeah, I totally agree. I couldn't agree more with that statement. Yeah, it's kind of a crazy world that we live in these days because there's so many different things going on. There's a lot of people who are worried about war. There's different things that are happening around the world, which I think scares a lot of people. And I guess like you probably saw a massive amount of people, like an uptick in your business during COVID, I'm guessing, because of all the authoritarian rules. And
it was the first time we had people who watched us for years on YouTube. We've got like 2,600 videos. If people haven't seen us at Nomad Capitalist. People who watched us for years. Okay, this guy's kind of entertaining. There's a Trump impression every once in a while. Okay, yeah, I kind of see his points, but hey, I don't need this. We saw a tremendous increase in families. Up until then, we had a lot of business. We had some married couples, but we had a lot of single like e-commerce entrepreneurs and stuff like that. People who just wanted to reduce their taxes because we help people legally reduce, if not eliminate, their taxes by moving overseas. That was a lot of the business. When COVID started, and then when crypto came with it, and a lot of like-minded people there, it went crazy. And we got, families of 11 in some cases, like extended families. Like, we need second passport. We need a backup plan. We want to have a big villa somewhere that if this place goes to hell, we can go there. And so it became a lot more involved in helping those people. And I mean, now we have some we help people who have as little as $1 million, but we help people who have hundreds of millions and billions of dollars sometimes. And some of them are like, I want plan G. I want plan A. Forget plan B. Give me B, C, D, E, F, and G. I'm not kidding. I want 5 passports. I want 4 residence permits. I want 3 pied-a-terres somewhere else. We had one guy, it's like, I don't want to go to the country. Can you get me a power of attorney? We figured that out. He's like, every time the private jet has to go there, it costs me $200,000. But hey, listen, I'll spend the $200,000 in the private jet if that's my ticket to freedom when this place has a problem and I can go to my house in that country where I became a citizen. I think it woke people up that when I started this in 2012, people, thought this guy's nuts. Why would an American need a second passport? Okay, fine. Americans have worldwide taxation. There's ways to greatly reduce it if you're an entrepreneur. Okay, why would a Canadian or an Australian or a British person need a second passport? Well, now they're seeing why. Boris Johnson was like, we don't have to renew your passport if we don't want to. Justin Trudeau taunted you that maybe you shouldn't be allowed to have a passport if you don't agree with him. Australia said, okay, you have a passport, but you can't come into your own country, which is like in total violation of all the international law. But who cares? And then people are like, oh, but, you go to Malaysia. What does the Constitution there say? Well, I think it's pretty clear that if you're an Australian, you should be allowed to go to Australia, but they didn't seem to mind.
Wow, yeah, that's so,
So let's talk about Malaysia, where I lived, by the way, where, yes, it did get worse in 2021 after I had left. But when I was there in 2020, I flew back from Myanmar 24 hours before the border closed. I've never had a good experience trying to go to Myanmar. It's been botched every time, but I was in Myanmar. I came back to see my wife. She said, come on, I think they're going to close the border. I came back just in time, and we spent about 6 weeks, like everybody else, locked down. Malaysia reopened before Florida did, but they don't have a loudmouth like Ron DeSantis going around flapping his jaw in his little white boots. So, you wouldn't know that. but it did.
Yeah.
So you can talk all you want about Australia and about Florida and about everything else. And by the way, during those 6 weeks, I mean, there were restaurants in Malaysia that were open because, they're a little more laid back and the white people live here. Oh, let them do whatever they, I just think it was a great lesson in soft freedom versus hard freedom. Hard
Yeah.
freedom is written down, but if you don't follow what's written down, who cares?
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think more and more going into the future, I think we're going to see like money is going to become harder to move. And they're going to say, oh, it's because of war and different things like that. And there's
We're
central
already doing
banks.
that.
Yeah, yeah, very true. I mean, the
Yeah.
US is one of the worst places for that.
Yeah, I mean, at least the U.S. I'll give the U.S. this because they're the ones who harasses everybody else. It's easier to move money from there. I have a bank account in the U.S. I don't get bothered too much. I've got a very good relationship with them. I think you want to have a relationship with whatever bank you have, and I do think people should have banks. I mean, I know some people are just 100% in Bitcoin. I'm for Bitcoin, but I don't want to be I'm not for being 100%.
No, no.
I think you want relationships with your banker. So the U.S. is fine. This is an example where you want a strong jurisdiction like the aforementioned Singapore, where they've got a clean reputation and there are some rules, but they're also flexible with you and they're transactional and it just works. I just moved some money out of the Bahamas recently, and it wasn't that bad, but they asked for more things than I would be asked for by the U.S. precisely because the U.S. central bank pressures their central bank, which pressures their banks. So
Yeah.
there's a balance to get with all of this. But yeah, go and try in a Western country to take out 5,000 euros in cash and see what they tell you.
Yeah. 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 It's not easy. I know it's not easy. It,
And we have a bank account in the U.S. for our North American clients. And I thought, could we get rid of it? And it's like, because I just don't want the tie to the US, but we did it for convenience and it doesn't affect our tax-friendly status. It's like, no, because when, in the United States, the banks are so obsolete that with many banks, you have to go into a branch to send a wire. I closed my TD Canada account recently. I've had it for probably about 12 years. I closed the
yeah.
account 11 years. I closed it recently. They had to send me a check to like a mailbox. And then the check took like a month to clear because it's from Canada. I don't have another Canadian bank. I don't want to have another Canadian bank. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, everything in North America is step into a branch. And if you step into a branch and say, hey, I want to send, X amount of money to Nomad capitalist in Hong Kong or in Europe or wherever else, you want to pay us, bankers are like, oh my God, other countries, there must be something terrible afoot. And a couple of people over the years have been spooked by that, and it's probably cost me $100,000 over the years. Because people who thought they wanted to go offshore don't actually want to go offshore. That's the challenge, is just this lack of international perspective. And that permeates everything in the US culture. People don't invest overseas. They don't consider options overseas. And I think that's going to be very dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. So, are there any final thoughts of wisdom that you want to leave us with tonight?
Well, I think, go where you're treated best is something that's an ethos for how everyone should live. I think it's how we live in most places. Again, if you fly in Qatar Airways and you're not happy with them, you're not going to fly them anymore. And I think that we should switch from sending a nasty email to the CEO or leaving a bad comment. Like, who cares? Just take your money and go somewhere else. They're not going to change because of you. Like, I think that particularly people like myself who are libertarian minded have this kind of ego that like, we have this outsized influence and that people care about our opinions and our vote matters. It's like, no, you're one person. There's 8 billion people in the world. Like, let's not be egoistic about this. And so go where you're treated best is a very simple roadmap. Again, it's what you do when you book an airline ticket. It's what you do when you choose a restaurant. It's what you do when you choose a partner. And listen, you can choose a partner, but if that person becomes abusive during your relationship, you're probably going to end the relationship. You certainly should. If someone starts, physically beating you or manipulating you or gaslighting you, I mean, that you might like to keep the relationship because that's how it's always been, but you probably want to, get out of that relationship. I think that we want to look at our relationship with our country like any other relationship, and we want to parcel it out to whichever place serves us best. Most countries in the world are competing with each other. They want your business. Singapore banks are going to be destitute if they don't get your 200 grand, but they'd like to have your business in many cases. And I think you should go places where your business is not only tolerated, but celebrated. And that's probably not where you're from. It's certainly not in the United States, where they win at nothing except prisoners per capita. It's the only thing they're the best at, statistically. I mean, so you can argue, you can tell me that the best beach, just statistically best at one thing, prisoners per capita. Sorry, like don't. That's the research, and that's how I think people should have relationships with their country. And I'm not saying that. Listen, I wasn't a big fan of the U.S. It was an easier decision for me, but when I see how good life is now, and I watch people make that transition, and I see people come up to me all around the world and say, "Hey, thanks to you, I changed my life. I met the woman of my dreams by going somewhere else. I did this, I did that." Go where you're treated best. It's a very powerful concept. It's what we're going to be talking about for 4 wall-to-wall days this September in Kuala Lumpur at Nomad Capitalist Live.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a great event. Yeah, and you guys, if you want to check out the event, there's a link in the description. Check it out. I will be there speaking. There's going to be many great, exciting speakers, much better than me, that I'm looking forward to seeing and meeting as well. So it'll be a fantastic event. So I want to thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on.
Thank you so much. We'll see you in Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah, thank you.